bills do come before the bodies respectively, that's when there will be time afforded for the public input on the matter. We welcome the Senate, some of you back to the House side from previous stints that you did here before you moved on to the other body. So welcome back, as it were. We welcome all of you this morning. Senator, did you have any?
Well, good morning, and thank you for the House members agreeing to have us in the joint meeting. Particularly for the Senate Education and Health Committee, we are having a number of pieces of legislation this morning and throughout the session dealing with the opioid crisis and its impact on the Commonwealth of Virginia. So we're delighted to have an opportunity to hear from Secretary Hazel and others. This is going to be a multi-year task for us to try to get our arms around it. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing us to join us today.
And again, we thank you all, and with that, we'll get right into the presentation. Secretary Hazel, we welcome your willingness.
Good morning, and thank you for having us.
And as the Secretary and others will be presenting, I'm going to ask members, unless you have a question needing clarification on something they brought up, if we could just kind of hold questions, let them get through the presentation. If there are questions you need to ask offline or off script, I know that they will be available at your leisure down the road to try and address those on a more individual basis if we can, but to try and move things along. If you have a question, though, that has to be asked, because not everybody has the request to speak, just raise your hand and I'll try and acknowledge, and we'll go from there. So, thank you, Secretary Hazel, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Chairman. Appreciate the opportunity to do some level setting here as we get started. I would acknowledge we're going to have a team presentation this morning, and part of it is to demonstrate that trying to address this problem is really a multifaceted approach, and all hands are on deck. My colleague, Secretary Moran, is here, and if necessary, he will get up and tell you what I meant to say. So let's start just a little bit. This is a map that I got from NGA. This is 1999 drug overdose deaths nationally. Drug overdose deaths are the tip of the iceberg of an addiction problem. This is an addiction problem. 1999, 2004, more red. Now in this context, red is bad. It's not always the case, as you know, but in this context, red is bad. 2009, 2014, and you can see the number of deaths from drugs has increased significantly from opiate-related drugs. Now, in the process of this happening, a couple things have happened over this time. One is there have been changes around the prescribing patterns of physicians driven by pain management issues, driven by pharma concerns, driven by Joint Commission that have changed what we as physicians have done. And at the same time, the bad guys have become real innovative. And the distribution networks around heroin have changed. And the medication or the drug itself has changed. It was OxyContin, Percocet, OxyContin, then it's heroin. The heroin gets stronger. The heroin gets laced with fentanyl. And we've now had a couple of deaths with perfentanyl recently, which is used to tranquilize elephants in veterinary sections. Multiple very, very deadly drugs. The outbreaks in West Virginia back in the late summer, early fall, and in Ohio recently from this deadly drug. The lesson of this is that when people go to the street, they don't know what they're getting. They're getting high, they want something strong, but they don't know what it is. They don't have the controls, and they die from it. We have seen the overdose deaths in Virginia increase. This gives you an example of all overdose deaths. And I want to point out that this year we're scheduled to be well over 1,000, maybe even to 1,100 if the numbers pan out like we expect. And it is different in different parts of the state. The face of the opioid addiction for Senator Carrico doesn't necessarily look like the addiction in the D.C. area for Senator Howell. It's different. You will hear them down there say things, we don't have heroin, we have a Suboxone problem. People break and enter to get Suboxone. It colors the approach to drug courts and other things that the rest of you don't necessarily see in your jurisdictions, and we're going to need to discuss that a little bit. These are prescription opioid overdoses, those Southwest. Then have taken prescribed medicine before they've taken the heroin. In our CSB population, in 2010, 35% of individuals presenting were substance use disorder. Now it's 41% of the people have substance use disorder, i.e. they are addicted, and 6.5% have abused or addicted to alcohol. Now, the issue here is addiction. The common theme with all of these drugs, whether it's nicotine, alcohol, Percocet, OxyContin, fentanyl, heroin, methamphetamines, cocaine, when you are addicted, it's something that's changed. Whatever got you started, now you are addicted. Your brain has been hijacked, as it were. And we wanted to explain that a little bit. We have a specialist. We're bringing a doctor in. Dr. Mishka Turplin is an infectious or an addictive medicine specialist at VCU. He's board certified in obstetrics and gynecology. He's just been at VCU for about 3 weeks, and he came from Baltimore, which unfortunately is probably the East Coast capital for the heroin crisis. And I'd like for Dr. Turplin to spend a few minutes with you, walking you through the very high level what the disease is and why this is a chronic disease once the individual is addicted, and why it just can't quit. Dr. Turplin?
Good morning, thank you. Thanks for having me. I want to begin just by looking at, not everyone who uses a substance becomes addicted to it. It depends by substance. The most addictive substance, so to speak, is nicotine. About 1/3 of people who've used nicotine in the past year will meet criteria for a use disorder. Opioids are second. Somewhere between 20 and 30% of people who used an opioid in the prior year develop an addiction. So not everyone. So the question is, why do some people become addicted and others don't? And it's a complex interplay between an individual's biology, their genes, their social environment, their home environment, the larger social environment, and their brain. In particular, we know a few things about what predisposes somebody to develop an addiction. The earlier you're exposed to a substance, the more likely you are to develop an addiction to it. Individuals with co-occurring other behavioral health conditions, mental health disorders, trauma, etc., are more likely to develop an addiction as well. In fact, when we think about adverse childhood experiences, childhood sexual or physical abuse, approximately 50 or so more percent of individuals with addiction will have those events. And amongst individuals with PTSD, returning veterans, other people, at least 50% of them have a lifetime likelihood of developing an addiction. And so for many people, when they first use a substance, they have these pre-existing vulnerabilities. And that can lead to a cascade of events of addiction. So we think about addiction as a disease that's centered in the brain, but that the symptoms are behaviors. Symptoms such as craving, symptoms such as compulsive use, symptoms such as continued to use in spite of knowledge of the harms, continue to use in spite of all the negative consequences that develop around you. And what I'll show you next, these compulsive use leads to changes in the brain's structure and in its function. Drugs enter the brain in what's called the reward center. It's at the center of that yellow, where all the yellow arrows come out of. And that's a very old part of the brain that regulates appetite, sex, etc. And all drugs to which people develop addictions enter there and lead to a cascade of neurotransmitters, one of which is dopamine. And those dopamine neurons project into the cortex. And that's the higher part of the brain, where executive function, behavior, memory, things like that. So you can see from an old part of the brain leads to disturbances of the higher levels of cognition. When we contrast brain images between individuals with an addiction and those without, you can see one column are people with addiction, the other those without, and the rows are by substance. And the red, the more bright colored areas are parts of the brain which light up where there's more activity of dopamine. And you can see people with addiction have a decrease in activity, a downregulation, of the receptors. So actually there's less of the dopamine activity brain. And that's part of when we say addiction's a disease. It's because it's preventable, it's treatable, but because it changes biology, just like other diseases. Diabetes changes the biology of an individual with diabetes. And these are images sort of contrasting healthy diseased brains and healthy diseased hearts. And you can see parallels in the imaging. So what happens if we don't treat addiction? This is the dominant media image of what addiction is actually in its untreated state. Addiction's been described as a career of narrowing options, and you see that. People, like, their social relations fall apart, their parents are guilty, they don't function in the workforce, they end up incarcerated, homeless. There's also individual level medical sequelae of untreated addiction. Bacterial endocarditis. You have diabetes and you have an addiction, you don't get treated for the diabetes or screened, so you end up in the hospital and the care costs more and is more complicated. And there's social/medical consequences. Acquisition and transmission of HIV and Hep C. And as you saw from the slides before, one of the other sequelae of untreated addiction is overdose and overdose death. So what's treatment? Addiction is a brain-centered disease, the symptoms are behavior, so you have to treat both. You have to treat the brain, and you have to treat the behaviors. So the biological basis of treatment is medication. For opioid use disorder, this would be methadone, buprenorphine, or naltrexone. But also, essential is the treating the behavioral component of addiction, and that's through counseling, etc. So what about relapse? Relapse is part of the disease process of addiction. It can occur at any time, during treatment, after treatment, and it means that the treatment, the intervention I'm giving somebody who relapses, that means that intervention's not working for them and I have to change my course. And it turns out that relapse for addiction looks very similar to relapse for diabetes, hypertension, or asthma. In fact, this slide comes from a study from about 20-some years ago now. And this is part of when we say addiction's a chronic disease, it's because it behaves like other chronic diseases. People relapse with addiction just like they do with hypertension, diabetes, or asthma. One of the other benefits of treatment is reduction in overdose death. The slide on the left is from Baltimore City. The red line is overdose death. And the bottom dotted line is buprenorphine. And obviously, before it was what didn't exist on the market. When it came on the market, we had a big uptake in prescribing and capacity within the system. And as more people got buprenorphine, overdose deaths decreased. And on the right-hand side is the relationship between overdose death and methadone. The blue line are people, rate of death prior to treatment entry. Red line during. Green is after treatment. So while people are engaged in care, they're far less likely to die. And if we lose them or they lose us, they can relapse post-treatment. So that speaks to the necessity of chronic management. So there's other benefits to medication-assisted treatment, not just reduction in use, reduction in acquisition, transmission of of Hep C and HIV, and also people get employed, they're not arrested, etc. So what's the goal of treatment? The goal is more than just abstinence. It's the inverse of what untreated addiction looks like. It's restored functioning of the individual, that they are in a healthy, happy relationship, that they're engaged in society, that they're working, that they're contributing to the civic community. And actually, those slides I showed you before about how the disease of addiction changes the brain, with treatment, in recovery, the brain returns to a normal state of functioning. The normal is on the top, that's 1 month abstinent. In the middle, you can still see decreased activity, and on the bottom, you see somebody who's been stable in recovery for a while. And the brain is functioning on that image just like the normal control. So not only is treatment possible, but we can heal the brain. So to conclude, I hope I've showed that addiction is a chronic disease, and we know a decent amount how to prevent it, and we know a huge amount about how to treat it. But from a chronic disease perspective, perspective. We actually do not know how to cure it. And therefore, public health, public policy, in the support of wellness, in the engagement of improving society, has to be located in this chronic disease or life course model of care. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I don't know, would you want to ask the doctor if there are any questions at this point, or do you want to wait until we're moved further down?
I think that's a wise item. Are there questions to the doctor?
Dr. O'Bannon?
Dr. Van, yes.
I really appreciate that. That's probably the best presentation in the fewest minutes that I've heard that really puts us where we are with this, because it's a physical diagnosis. I'm just curious, since you're from Baltimore, your graph went to 09.
Yes.
Can you just, if you're able to do it, share what's happened in Baltimore since then with the introduction of the fentanyls and all the changes that have occurred in this scenario?
So if I remember correctly from that graph, the overdose number for Baltimore City at that point in time, which when it decreased was let's say somewhere around 200-ish per year, and now it's well over 300. And that's been driven to a large extent by that the capacity, the buprenorphine capacity, didn't keep going up. It actually also leveled off at that point in time. The methadone treatment capacity, unchanged. And the introduction of synthetics, in particular fentanyl, which is far more potent than heroin, and impossible to know from looking at it, is it heroin, is it fentanyl, is it whatever.
Thank you.
Dr. Hayes? And my apologies for having to step out.
Thank you. Just appreciate having the opportunity to be here. I want to talk a little bit about how we're approaching this. And anyone here remember the football coach Woody Hayes besides Gordon? Woody Hayes coached at Ohio State, and he ran the ball, right? Why do you run the ball? He says, because when you pass the ball, 3 things can happen and 2 are bad. And when people are addicted, 3 things can happen and 2 are bad. You can die, and regrettably, that may be merciful for some people. You can get into recovery, as the good doctor has talked about, or you have this neverland where you live with the addiction. And I would ask you, who pays for that? We crime. Major Settle will be up later to talk about that. Family disruption. Carl Ayers from Social Services is going to talk about that. Neonatal abstinence. There are generally 2 or 3 babies in the ICU nursery in Winchester Valley Medical at any time. Instead of the normal pregnancy and delivery where everybody goes home happy, the average cost is about $60,000 for these babies. Deaths and the use of naloxone. And then there's this whole matter of infectious disease, which Commissioner Levine is going to address. So I would ask you, who pays? And when I speak out in public, I say this is the call and response portion of the sermon. And when I say who pays, you all say we all do. Who pays? We all do. Yeah, and we all do. And the problem I have right now, which you can help me with, is it's hard to quantify the costs on an individual basis. We think in 2010 it's about $55 billion nationally. We think for just the social cost, another $25 billion for the medical costs. We are all incurring this cost. But all we measure in the state budget is the treatment. Dr. Barber will tell you what that costs in a minute. So the first thing that we look at in our sort of 5 categories of treatment is harm reduction. Until treatment is available, how do we reduce the harm? You use naloxone. You try to intervene with neonatal abstinence babies by helping their mothers stay in recovery. There'll be legislation around that. We deal with the